This book is about desiring the right things.
The taming of the human heart to love what it ought to love and to give itself entirely to that which it loves.
Welcome to Media Mystics, a podcast encouraging encounters with Christ through film, music, poetry, video games, and all mediums of inspiring art. Your hosts are Charlie and Thomas, two men on a quest to grow closer to God and illuminate our culture. Today we explore the novella, The Little Prince. While we discuss these works of art from a Catholic perspective, the views on this podcast are our own and not official perspectives of the Catholic Church. We do not endorse every message of these works. Personal discernment is advised. Join us as we seek to become Media Mystics.
Here we are once again. I'm Thomas. That's Charlie. And then the great gentleman that you see in the middle of us is Billy. He's here as an expert today to talk to us about one of his favorite texts, The Little Prince. The Little Prince. So welcome, Billy. Glad that you're here today with us.
Good to be here with you guys.
Tell us a little bit about the story, Billy.
Oh, man. You know, there's a point in the story where the author says, I would have liked to have started the story by saying, once upon a time there was a little prince, in like the typical fairy tale story. But he doesn't begin that way because he's really trying to sift through what he likes to call us being grown-ups and not having accepted like what Christ asks of us, becoming like little children. So the story, it kind of entails the author finding himself crash landed in the middle of the Sahara Desert and trying to fix his airplane. And then all of a sudden, a little prince from who knows where comes up and starts talking to him, asks him to draw him a sheep. And it kind of spins through the life of the little prince. Little by little, he gains information about the little prince, where he's come from another planet, the journey that he took to get to Earth, and ultimately the prince's dedication and in relationship with a flower. Ultimately, the little prince, throughout the whole of the story, learns what real love is, and that love entails responsibility, and responsibility entails sacrifice. So it's a beautiful story. I read it with my study hall group, my Kairos guys, probably like once every time I have a new group of guys, and because it's just like there's so much richness and depth in it, and yet it's awesome, like wonderfully whimsical and lighthearted. So. Yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah, beautiful. And so in case it's not clear, there are going to be spoilers about The Little Prince today, but it's been a book that's been around for a long time. And if you haven't read it, it's a quick read. Please do it before you listen to the rest of this podcast. But yeah, we're going to start talking about some of those themes that are so prevalent in The Little Prince and that make it such a beloved text by both Christians and non-Christians alike. So, yeah.
If you guys were both to give like a one-sentence thesis, like elevator pitch on this book, not like feeling free to spoil anything, what would be your one-sentence pitch? Feel free to think about that if you need some time.
Yeah, I would say for me, this book is about desiring the right things. And I think that is like a really, really key theme in the book. And it's about a little boy who desires the right things, doesn't always do it perfectly, but wants to, and is trying to teach us how to desire the right things too.
And I guess related to that, this book is about the taming of the human heart to love what it ought to love and to give itself entirely to that which it loves.
And I'm here as your onlooker today. I've read the first 70% of this book through being very sleepy last night when I was attempting to read this. So I'm gonna be your questioner today. I actually really loved though this like writing from the get-go. I thought it was like, I haven't read any book that has the same kind of like really fast, beautiful little bits of literature. Like I feel like from what I read, for Christians that are familiar with The Imitation of Christ, and it's like really quick, punchy chapters that all hit like quick spiritual like nuggets of wisdom. I loved the format of this book, and it's super fast chapters. And I feel like this is like the fable fiction children's story of like The Imitation of Christ on like relationships. Was how I was feeling as I was reading through it. But I've only gotten to the fox and the taming conversation that they like initially have. So
I kind of like the interpretation. It's not bad because it's basically just like a bunch of like micro adventures that the Little Prince has, and there's like some quippy one-liner or two-liners in there that's just like, hey, this is what you ought to do instead.
Yeah, so I've yet to see the exact like climax conclusion, but I'm like, man, these are like worthwhile to just like, you know, I teach a class, even just like they're so short, like you could just read one at the beginning of class and just like let that be a reflection. You know, like it's a nice little reflective bit to sit with. It's really cool.
Can I share one?
Please, yeah.
So this is actually a whole chapter. So it's a very short chapter, but it's chapter 23. Starts off, "Good morning," said the little prince. "Good morning," said the sales clerk. This was a sales clerk who sold pills invented to quench thirst. Swallow one a week and you no longer feel any need to drink. "Why do you sell these pills?" "They save so much time," the sales clerk said. "Experts have calculated that you can save 53 minutes a week." "And what do you do with those 53 minutes?" "Whatever you like." "If I had 53 minutes to spend as I liked," the little prince said to himself, "I'd walk very slowly toward a water fountain."
So good. Yeah, so a lot of the story is composed, as you guys have seen, like about like a bunch of these like kind of quippy stories about like, I met a man who calculated something that he thought was meaningful but was actually meaningless, and I met this sales clerk who was trying to sell me something that I already had, and so I really like this idea that's like coming through the book of like all these stories about he's meeting adults that are trying to they desire something, but it turns out the thing that they desire is just not correct. So we see like the thing here, like this guy is like trying to give him a desire to like get these water tablets, right? And he's a salesman. He's trying to get him to buy these water tablets, but it's just not something that's necessary, right? One of my favorite stories in the book is there's a guy who he's counting. And he's doing all of this math figuring, and the Little Prince is like, something about it is like, the author, I think, rather says, yeah, adults love figures. If you ever want an adult to like start getting interested in something you're interested in, just let them talk to you about the numbers that surround it. Ask them how much a house costs, and then they get really interested rather than what do you like about the house. And so really some beautiful lines, but this guy, maybe to just tell the story, he's counting stars, right? And he's doing all this figuring to count the number of stars that he has. And the Little Prince is like, "Why are you counting all those stars?" And he's like, "Because I own them." And the Little Prince is like, "It doesn't seem like you own them." And then the guy basically says, "But since I was the first one to think of owning them, I do. And so I count them." And the Little Prince says, "So what do you do now that you own them?" He's like, "I count them." And he's like, "And why is that good?" And he's like, "Because then I can put it in the bank." "And what's the bank?" "This drawer with a sheet of paper about how many stars I own."
He's like, "You can't put the stars in the bank. Like you can't get them." And he's like, "But I write them down on this paper and that goes in the drawer." And it's like, that's enough.
Yeah. And so I think like that one in particular is about like, about wealth in particular, about what is your wealth really doing? Wealth is like, we often like look at money as like something to be pursued, but always, and we've probably said this on the podcast before, I've definitely talked about it with Billy, wealth is a placeholder for some other real good, beauty, truth, or goodness, that we ought to actually enjoy. And so what the Little Prince is saying is like, you can't enjoy it. This man isn't enjoying it. He's just being interested or entertained by the calculation.
Because when
So-
he encounters him, he's up to like what, the billions, millions, or whatever, like counting these things, and like he won't.
Something ridiculous.
He's not responding in conversation to the Little Prince. You know, Little Prince asks him a question, and he's just rattling off more numbers, and he has this whole bit about like, I've been interrupted 3 times in all of my life. You know, like, you know, a couple like, you know, decades ago was this instance. You know, when a beetle fell from who knows where in front of me and it distracted me, and like the 3rd time is now with you, and he continues counting. And I think that there was a really beautiful, certainly like commentary on like wealth and people that are just like so fixated on like accumulating more and more wealth. But I also saw it in just like, I interpreted it and applied it to sort of like any love for a particular like craft where you can get so like fixated on just like developing the craft. Like I think of people that play, like I've played Dungeons and Dragons. Have you guys played Dungeons and Dragons?
Oh,
yeah.
Okay. So at least in Dungeons and Dragons, like 5th edition, you can just get so fixated on like, I'm going to figure out like what are the items or the things that I'm going to use to like perfectly execute like this move. And like I can spend so much time getting to be an expert on the rule book of Dungeons and Dragons that like I'm so honed in on like I know how to stack my character and like max min every thing that I need. And like people, you know, can go online and share like these incredible builds to do the most damage and like plant any video game in there also you want, you know.
Yeah,
like
so true.
the meta mechanics of like whatever video game you like you can get so in the details of like this is my damage per second, and like I'm counting and mechanizing all of this, and like that's how I saw it, because I'm less
And
a
then it
counter of-
becomes not fun.
Yeah, or then you just never play. Or you play less.
Yeah, and it's not even to discount, like if you like that and you balance that, right, and that's actually a joy and is fruitful, fine, right?
Yeah,
I find a
can be.
joy in that. It's not an inherent bad thing to get super focused on something and to like counting and being a strategic individual. But like those situations, I was like, wow, I do that. Where sometimes I'll get so focused on a video game for like a week and a half, and I'm just like getting really into it, and then like a month later, it's not of importance to me at all. But for that week and a half, it was so important for me to like perfect my craft. That's how I looked at it too. It was a nice challenge.
Yeah, would totally agree. Yeah, do you guys like any of the other, like, I don't know if you have any comments on that, but any other like of the particular parables of like him meeting people in the worlds that you really liked? Because I like these worlds, because he just goes to these different worlds. He's from his own planet. And then he goes to these different planets that, like, each one is occupied by only one person until he gets to the Earth. And so I kind of like this idea, too, of, like, these different guys that he's meeting, these different people that he's meeting, are all on their own lonesome planets, right? But they're occupied by one particular thing, one particular vice, if you will. So any of the other ones coming to mind for you guys? Otherwise, I'll just start popping off about the other ones I like.
One of the other ones, I don't like. Yeah, one of the other ones is a drunkard, and so the drunkard has on one side of him a stack of empty bottles, and then on the other side of him a stack of full bottles, and he's just drinking. And the little prince is like, "What are you doing?" And he says, "I'm drinking." And seeing him in distress is like, "Well, why are you drinking?" And he says, "'Cause I'm ashamed." It's like, ashamed of what? Of drinking. And it's like, and it's just the circular logic. And the little prince is like, what? And what I think that what I like most about it, because like that's kind of the end of that scene. Like there's not much else there. But what I like about it is in the next one, when he talks about the businessman counting the stars, he applies the same. He like looks at the businessman. It's like, this man, like his logic is a little bit like my drunkard. Like, what are you doing? I'm counting stars. Why? So that you can be rich. So that I can be rich. Why? So that I can buy more stars.
Yeah, so true. So true.
And it's yeah, but particularly with the drunkard, we can get so consumed. So like we can get consumed with numbers and consumed with amassing wealth, but then we can get consumed with particular pleasures to the point where then we start like, or maybe it's not the consumed with the pleasures, but Oftentimes that leads to shame, or we find shame in our life in other ways, and then we end up utilizing pleasure to deal with the shame, and then it's just like this like negative feedback loop. And we like so often we never see the actual logic of what we're living.
Yeah.
And I just love how this book teaches those things to kids in ways that like they can understand, and it's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's really, I think the word, this is written for kids in a lot of ways. And like, if you're like, they talk about a drunkard in a kid's book, they call him in my translation, a tippler, which was,
really?
kind of interesting.
It's funny you bring up translation because I went to like Amazon to purchase it on the Kindle.
This is originally a French book, by the way. Yeah.
I don't think I knew exactly what language it was. I think in the back of my mind, I was like, I think this was in a different language, but there was several different like Kindle versions online. And the first one that like pops up on the top is like $10 or whatever else. And then like I scroll down and like, there's one here for like 25 cents. Like, and it's probably just because it has like black and white art or something like that. Or maybe it's like not as, I don't know, maybe the cover art isn't as nice. So I buy that one and I'm like reading and I'm like, wow, the language in this is very interesting and like very choppy. But then like for the third time, it was like, I was talking to her and he said, like, and it's switching pronouns. And it was like in the early paragraph, it said like, I flew over the China of Arizona. And I was like, what is that? And then I was like,
interesting symbolism.
I was like, this has got to be a translation problem. Like we got to the end of the first chapter and I was like, what am I reading? And I went and found like a PDF online of like the actual first chapter. And what he actually, is saying is like, I as a pilot can tell the difference between the geography of China from the geography of Arizona. And I was like, wow, make sure you're buying a decent translation of this book because I've never had such a garbled translation in my life.
That's really funny.
As far as a story that I think I've enjoyed, and again, I've only read like the first 70% of it, but I liked The Planet with the Very Vain Man. And maybe because it challenges me the most, because maybe I am that very vain man. But it just talked about this relationship of, I think he's encapsulated well in this first response of him. He says like, a visit from an admirer, he exclaimed when he caught sight of the little prince, still at some distance. To vain men, other people are admirers. And I was like, oh man, what a beautiful like reduction of a person's being into like a utilitarian or a useful function, which is like you exist to give me admiration. And I was like, wow, where do I do that? I probably do it with, like sure, friends and stuff, like in conversation, wanting to be liked, wanting to be funny or whatever else.
Yeah.
But probably also like in my job, because as a teacher, like you're standing in front of 100 and something people throughout a day and you're trying to make lessons that are like impactful and like benefit people's lives and are planting seeds that is going to be interesting. And that can be an environment where it's really easy for me to like want positive feedback, especially like, when they're like giving you feedback at the end of the quarter and like writing about like either how much they loved the class or how much they hated the class. And just like, that's like, I think a temptation to be aware of is like, where am I in my work just wanting like admiration from people? For me, it's as a teacher, but I feel like people could probably experience that in all sorts of ways in their life that I liked how they framed it. Typically, I feel like people will say like, they warn against like, oh, don't just live for like, people's praise and admiration. Okay, yeah, great. But like the childlike way that this story is presented and the way it says like other people are admirers, and it was like that's what they just exist as, just kind of challenged me in a different way. So I like the language in this book and that it gets me to rethink about basic moral teachings I've already heard in like a new light. Yeah,
I would say that there's something true about what you're saying too, is like, and I think it's like something, especially as you move from childhood to adulthood and you move from even like adulthood to like a more like less full of yourself. Like I don't know about you guys, but in college and right after college, I was pretty full of myself. I still am pretty full of myself. I'm sure that people talk about me all the time and say how full of myself I am. So, but one of the things is like everybody else seems like a little bit flat compared to me. Like I don't see the depth of other people's being as much as I should or could. And like obviously the vain man like experiences that more than anyone else. Everyone here is here to adore me. And I don't think that like on any real level, but I don't often think about the person behind the person, the person behind the face, if you will, and like all the whole world that they are, right? I only ever look at like, oh, how are they acting towards me? And so there's a great moral call there, I think, to treat them as people and to remember their personhood. So,
yeah, on that line of personhood, I think one of the great themes that this book has is precisely that idea that people trump things, that like persons are greater than things. And I think that that's one of these big ideas that separates the little prince or the childlike from the grown-ups. So there's a particular scene that comes to mind early on when the pilot is trying to fix his engine and the bolt is jammed, and he's thinking to himself like, man, if I can't get this bolt out of my engine, I'm going to whack it off with a hammer because I'm starting to run out of drinking water, and I'm like, we're going to die here if I can't get this fixed. And the little prince is asking about the sheep and if sheep eat flowers. But like, what about thorns? Like, flowers have thorns. Like, does that stop the sheep from eating the flower? And he's like, no, they eat it anyways. And so I just want to read this little interchange because it shows how angry the little prince gets about all of this. And I think that it speaks something different in the mindset of the author, or of the guy fixing his plane, and the little prince. What good are thorns? The little prince never let a question go once he had asked it. I was annoyed by my jammed bolt, and I answered without thinking. Thorns are no good for anything. They're just a flower's way of being mean. Oh. But after a silence, he lashed out at me with a sort of bitterness. I don't believe you. Flowers are weak. They're naive. They reassure themselves with whatever they can. They believe their thorns make them frightening. I made no answer. At that moment, I was thinking, if this bolt stays jammed, I'll knock it off with the hammer. Again, the little prince disturbed my reflection. Then you think flowers... No, not at all. I don't think anything. I just said whatever came to my head. I'm busy here with something serious. He stared at me, astounded. Something serious? He saw me holding my hammer and my fingers black with grease, bending over an object he regarded as very ugly. You talk like the grown-ups. That made me a little ashamed, but he added mercilessly, You confuse everything. You've got it all mixed up. He was really very annoyed. He tossed his golden curls in the wind. I know a planet inhabited by a red-faced gentleman. He's never smelled a flower. He's never looked at a star. He never loved anyone. He never has done anything except added up numbers. And all day long, he says over and over, just like you, I'm a serious man. I'm a serious man. And that puffs him up with pride. But he's not a man at all. He's a mushroom. He's a what? A mushroom. The little prince was now quite pale with rage. For millions of years, flowers have been producing thorns. For millions of years, sheep have been eating them all the same. And that's not serious? Trying to understand why flowers go to such trouble to produce thorns that are good for nothing? It's not important. The war between the sheep and the flowers? It's not more serious and more important than the numbers that the fat red gentleman is adding up? Suppose I had known a unique flower, one that exists nowhere in the world except on my planet, one that a little sheep could wipe out in a single bite one morning just like that, without even realizing what he's doing. That isn't important? His face turned red now, and he went on. If someone loves a flower of which just one example exists among the millions and millions of stars, that's enough to make him happy when he looks at the stars. He tells himself, my flower's up there somewhere. But if the sheep eats the flower, then for him it's as if suddenly all the stars went out. And that isn't important? And it goes on a little bit, but yeah, the little prince is wrapped up, and like as the story goes on, that's the first kind of instance that the pilot learns about the flower, and more details about the flower and what happened. But he sees a glimpse of like, wow, this little prince is so concerned with the flower that he doesn't care about death. He doesn't see like the difficulty that I'm in. Like, I'm so concerned about death that I am fixated on things. So, and there's this shifting that goes on, that it's like, it's better to die caring for people than to live consumed by things.
Yeah. I was also really struck by that section, and I was so surprised because like the little prince is just like such a happy-go-lucky figure, but like he's representing like childlikeness, right, in the story, and childlikeness is not something that's like, oh, like things don't matter, and like I drew you this sheep in a box, and I can imagine the sheep existing, and that's fun, but like the childlikeness that he has, it seems to care for the right things. And it, kind of what you said, Billy, as like a kind of teaser trailer at the beginning was the little prince begins to care, like tries to teach us how to care about the things that matter. And that's part of becoming like little children again.
Yeah.
To cast off things like vanity and glory and wealth and power, as one of the other planets had it. But of course, all of these are different ways of like trying to face like my own death, my own mortality, and the little prince is like a very, very great hero for recognizing that like death is it's not as important as love. Yeah.
Yeah, I really liked that section also as I was reading it. That was probably one of the moments that part I was actually listening to on like an audiobook reading of it too, because I had it in two different formats, or was listening to it in two different formats. And that was like one of the moments I was like, man, that like if anything I've read has like made me a little bit emotional in listening to it. And I think that I don't think I have sat with it enough to like fully articulate where I need to like sit and pray with this, but I think that it was just beautiful in, the reflection on like what is important. I feel like there's so many times in my life, like growing up, I wanted to work in the entertainment industry, like making video games. And I went to school for a couple of weeks to do so, and was just in the rhythm of like, okay, this is what my life would probably look like. Like I'm modeling assets and characters and environments for a video game. And that's probably the stuff that I would like to do, as opposed to maybe like the animation or lighting aspect of things. And just having this moment of like, is what I'm doing important? And I think I was measuring it out of like the amount of time that I'm spending on this thing, and like, is this going to be a hit? Like, there was this temptation of like, look at how many video games are out there in the world, and I'm so unlikely to be one of those great successful video game artists that it's like, it's hard to see that this is like important stuff. Like, I'm going to work 3 years on a project and then it flops. And where there certainly can be a space of like, okay, the world is also shifting, and that a lot of video game developers are going like independent, where they can do like more small tailored projects and they get a little bit more creative control. And I was feeling a little bit burnt out, and then like, oh my gosh, I'm entering into like maybe a workforce where I could be like one person who's just modeling like the legs of a Star Wars droid that will be in 2 shots. And like, okay, that just might be that's just a human reaction to feeling like I want to have some creative input on a thing. And maybe I was getting burnt out by that. But I think my point here is that scene in the book was inviting me to reflect on like, don't measure it by like, how much of a viral hit something might be, and like measure it on like, if I made a game that some people find like touches their hearts, or there's a story that it tells that like moves them, or if it is for my friends, even if it's not like a large scale project that makes money, but if it's a work of art that I like and it blesses my like small community, like that's serious, and that is something of value. And just his language of like, my flower is out there. Like, I want to love my neighbor, like that person who's important to me. And and not just judging like, is this work important based on the numbers of people it impacts and if it's a viral hit, but like, am I loving somebody in the work that I'm doing? And I think that can be a good refocus measure in any capacity. And I feel like the saints are probably the people that just like lived that so deeply. They're like, I see what is important, and just doing something that's like, my neighbor is out there hurting, like my neighbor is out there sick. It's like, I must take care of serving the poor, because like, I feel like their flower was like every brother and sister. Like, I feel like the saints just found a space to love all people as like their flower in a way.
Yeah. Yeah. And maybe I'll use that thought to transition a little bit to our kind of like, middle of the show announcements. One of the things that we've been trying to do, on our podcast is say like, where have we seen God this week? And even just take a step back from the media and say like, hey, like what has been like a place that God is trying to reach us this week, and where do we see that? And what you just said like really relates to my thing this week that I was like really excited to share with you, which was I went to adoration this week, and I go to a church with a lot of people, but one of the groups that meets is the Lay Missionaries of Charity, and so I accidentally joined their adoration hour twice in the past week, and so it was funny the first time because I was like, well, that's Dallas, like I don't know, it was just kind of funny, and then the second time I was like, oh,
where's the sign up form?
I'm here again. But one of the things that I've just been thinking about, especially So Cold this week, is just like they add something to the divine praises, which may be, I don't know, scandalous for some of you out there, but it's all the divine praises in Catholicism are like, blessed be God, blessed be his holy name, blessed be Jesus Christ, true God and true man, etc. But one of the things that they add is, blessed be the Jesus in the poorest of the poor.
I like that.
Like, I don't remember that often enough. Like when I'm interacting, and I think I thought about the poor a lot this week with the weather, but like when I'm interacting with my students who are extremely frustrating sometimes, not the ones that are listening, you guys are great, but like my other frustrating students. And like when I'm like interacting with my family, and like when my family is like hard to love, or when my roommates are hard to love, like that's still Jesus. And that's what the Lord is maybe trying to teach me this week. So yeah. Do you guys have anything like in particular from this week that like you've been seeing like a movement from the Lord to try to invite you to think or to pray or to love in a different way?
I just need to take less time on my phone. Definitely. Like I've just noticed I've gotten into this habit of like getting stressed, or like when I sit down to like go to bed, just like doing some decompression time or something with like scrolling through whatever, Instagram or YouTube seems like the two media platforms that I use, and just I keep wasting time. And like I find so much more satisfaction out of either praying or doing something that is of value. Not that like those things can't be enjoyable in moderation, but just I need to make more intentional time for like it is prayer time, and not letting devices get in the way.
Yeah.
For me, mine, I guess not getting too far into it. I am have been pretty compelled in the past week that I need to do Exodus 90 again this upcoming year leading up to Easter. And for those who don't know, Exodus 90 is a spiritual plan where you really kind of cut out everything, all like normal coping mechanisms that people have in their life, of various sense pleasures, to cut out all of those coping mechanisms so that we can learn how to depend entirely on the Lord in prayer and entirely on a fellowship of community of brothers around us. And there's a whole lot of things that you give up, like you take cold showers, and you're not eating between meals, and you're fasting on Wednesdays and Fridays, and you're not having sweets, you're not having alcohol, you're not watching TV or anything like that. So, and like I've done Exodus before, and like leading up to the time where it's kind of like trying to decide, and like people around me are deciding to do Exodus, I was kind of dreading the idea of it.
Yeah, it's dreadful. It's a dreadful idea, but also like one that causes us to dread positively.
And so I was trying to decide this, and my parish is really ultimately starting small groups at the parish through this E90 program. So I was like, well, I've got a group of guys that I meet with regularly, and like maybe like I want that to be my small group. Maybe we want to do Exodus together. And for the most part, everybody was like, no, or like we want to do a partial Exodus. And like I've had times in the past where like I've really wanted to grow. I've like felt the Lord calling me to grow in fasting and like self-denial, and it's been incredibly fruitful, and I've grown in a love like so many of the saints have for fasting and what it offers in the spiritual life of depending more solely on the life of grace in the soul. But like I was just dreading it, and through various like experiences this week in my personal prayer time with prayer in the chapel with students, and then like a meeting with the group of guys, it was just like abundantly clear of like, okay, the Lord wants to lead me into this again, and He wants to help me to depend on Him. So I'm very excited about it, but like there's still like a hesitancy, but I also like I think that the Lord is, it's clear to me in this past week that He is leading me into this. And so I'm excited to see what He does.
A brief thought that I had on what you were saying. My students and I just finished up a lesson on like basically how might like Christianity respond to the like spiritual but not religious movement of even just taking a look at like maybe Christians who say like, I want an individual relationship with Christ, which is good. But like, I don't subscribe to a specific like religion or a specific like community of beliefs. And we walked through like, okay, well, what's the difference? Like, what defines religion Christianity versus like just like individual spiritual Christianity?
Sure.
And I would say like, you know, the goal is hopefully like the religious Christian also is a spiritual Christian. Like you don't want to, it's not a one or the other. Like it should be both, I would argue. That like I need, if I'm doing all the external ritualistic religion stuff and I don't have like an internal spiritual encounter with Jesus, like I'm probably needing to reflect on that. But we kind of got to defining like, you know, the spiritual but not religious category maybe is more focused on like individual experience and a bit of an openness and freedom to explore without a specific authoritative structure or organized community, you know, with set rituals, set beliefs, and set expectations. And we kind of walked through like, okay, well, is there evidence to support, like, which side does Jesus take? Does Jesus think He established a religion, or does He think like He established the spiritual but not religious side? And there's a really good Catholic Answers article I'll link in the description below that walks through that. But one beauty that I see and why like the religious aspect of my faith is so important to me is as you're talking about Exodus 90, I'm like, yeah, I value fasting, and I do a bit of that on like Fridays. I have some kind of things that I try to do, and it's like minor. It's not like anything as extreme as Exodus 90. And I'm like, but I don't think I'm ready for Exodus 90, like maybe another time later. And I'm like, how many times have I said that to myself? And the beauty of just like Lent, when an authoritative entity of the church says, now is the time to fast, and you are required to do it in this season, especially on this day, Ash Wednesday, and this day, Good Friday, we're all doing it together, is really awesome. I don't know. As you were just speaking about fasting, I was like, thanks be to God that the Lord has given me an authority to tell me now's the time to do the good thing that you are waiting to do. And like obligation is kind of beautiful, and that I would probably keep postponing the hard but good thing that I know that I should do. So my brain was just thinking on religion and why religion and a structure is like a beautiful authority to have in your life.
Yeah. And God has given us, as St. John talks about, He's given us grace in place of grace. And like, that's what the church is too. It's an extra grace to help us to find Him and to be with Him, and an essential grace to be part of His family, which is how He wants to save us. So yeah, I love that reflection.
Yeah,
that's
thank you.
Charlie.
And if you wanted the spoiler version of that article, Jesus established a religion is like the conclusion that he upholds, but he goes through pretty good with like evidence towards that, which I think is great. And like, you know, He said, "You are Peter, and upon this rock I'll build my church. I give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. You know, if somebody sins against you, go and tell it to the church. And if they don't listen to the church, like let them be like a Gentile or a tax collector to you. You know, things like that." He walks through specific scriptures where it looks like there is some level of community that has authority over the spiritual life. Somewhere, I don't remember what letter it is, you know, that says like, let us not give up meeting together like there is.
Yeah,
sure. So,
we'll definitely put that in the description. Yeah, and while you're looking at the description, also look at the subscribe button. Thank you.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, please.
I was going to say another final announcement too here before I have a couple questions for you, Billy. We also have another playlist called the Mystic Moments playlist. If you want to jump into prayer, we also write specific meditations to just like have guided meditation for your prayer time. It's like 7 to 10 minute guided things. You know, we'll have one on The Little Prince at some point.
Yeah,
published.
For sure.
But coming back to our story on The Little Prince, if that's cool.
Yeah. Back in action.
Tell me about like your just like theological view of it, because like where I was introduced to The Little Prince was at your wedding. Your brother did your wedding, and he referenced, you know, the fox and the taming.
Oh yeah.
And I was like, oh, I'm intrigued. And so like certainly I know that you and your family have a theological view of this story, and it seems like this story has impacted your faith. And it doesn't seem I don't know the author, and I don't know if his intent had anything to do with faith on the outset. I haven't gotten to the conclusion yet, or if that seems clear. It doesn't seem to be a particularly faith explicit story. And I was kind of intrigued as I was reading it, because as we got to some sections, I was like, if I didn't know Thomas and Billy and that they liked it and that it benefited their faith lives, I was interpreting some of the passages as like, I'm seeing this as a dig on some sort of Christian moments.
Well.
And it could have just been the way that I was thinking about it. And I haven't and sometimes I was reading a little further and I was like, I don't know. Sure. And I could share a couple of those moments if you're intrigued of like what I was reading.
But to hear Billy's perspective.
But I want to hear like your perspective on.
Yeah, I'm just a fan of Billy, so I'll let Billy explain it.
I want a Billy faith theology rant.
And then I'll try to utterly destroy his logic.
Yes.
But probably to no avail. So for me, there are very clear theological themes here, but for me, my two loves in life is like childlike playfulness, and I love playing with kids, and philosophy, particularly metaphysics. You know, when I introduce myself to my students at the beginning of a trimester and sharing different facts about myself, I always tell them that my favorite books are The One and the Many, a contemporary guide to mystic metaphysics by Norris Clark, and The Little Prince, which I think those two side by side are a perfect juxtaposition of my personality and like how I can be super orderly and serious and logical and systematic in my approach, but I'm also kind of like whimsical and very playful, I think, and at times as well. So I
love that. That's awesome.
What I find in this, and if there are Jordan Peterson fans out there, Jordan Peterson talks a lot about like this dynamic between order and chaos in the world around us. That kind of relates to like the Eastern philosophies, yin yang principle kind of thing, the light and the darkness. And I think there's a lot of truth in what he says about all of that. The term that I would prefer to use rather, because like you can't put good and evil as complementary things in the world. Order and chaos aren't complementary opposites. They're in many ways opposed to one another. I think that I prefer thinking about it as like structure and spontaneity. And I think that what this book captures in a lot of ways is that spontaneous, whimsical kind of nature that we long for. Like we don't want something that is, and this is maybe why like so many people like gravitate away from religion particularly, is because they don't like the order. They think that it's like too constricting.
Yeah.
They like the whimsical nature of the spiritual life. But what this book I think really does is it connects that whimsicalness back into a groundedness in relationship and a groundedness in reality, to learn to love what's worth having in many ways. So particular, like getting into what my brother says. So ultimately, where I learned about this book was my brother came home, and he was a young priest at the time, and he had read this with his youth group, and he came home and was like, "Hey, like if we as a family might sit down and spend 2.5 hours on a movie, like we could sit down and spend 2.5 hours reading this book together." And so we were like, okay, yeah, why not? And it just like smacked me upside the head. Like the whole of the book, like it's a book that you could read over and over again throughout your life and find new little snippets, while at the same time being very simple, very approachable. And I think that that's a good image for what the gospel actually is. Like no matter where you enter, like discipleship with the Lord, you can wade in it as a kiddie pool, but like you can go out into deep waters at the same time with the same texts. But in that homily that you referenced at my wedding, the big thing that he kind of pulls out, and maybe this will get into like the theological side of things. The big thing that he pulls out is this idea of being tamed. That when you know someone and they have impacted your life and you've spent time around them, and in many ways your life has become dependent on them, wrapped up in them, as the passage here with the fox talks about, you see things anew because of them. And when you see something in the world around you, it reminds you of them. And in a way, it makes you long for them, or like wish that they were there. And so he, in his wedding homily, was like, whenever I see cheese balls, I will always think of Billy.
Hilarious.
And whenever Victoria's siblings see cows, they will always think of Victoria. And there's laughter, because like for the people in the pews that know the backstories there, that they're just cracking up because like they know. And he says, and what he said in the homily is like, and for the rest of you, I'm not going to tell you like what the backstory behind those things is, because it proves my point that because you are not in that relation, you haven't spent that time, you haven't been tamed by them, you'll just never know that that's what relationship and responsibility to this other person entails. So yeah, that idea of being tamed, and what the book really hones in on is like that idea of being tamed is very connected in the book and in the spiritual life, well, particularly in like a sacrament of marriage, to commitment and to giving yourself entirely to this person that you are committing to. And so I see like this book, one, as incredible dating advice.
Yeah, actually true.
But two, since marriage is supposed to be an image for the love of the Trinity and Christ's love for the church and God's love for the soul, what I see further than that, just dating advice and like relationship advice, I see it as an image for intimate prayer, contemplative prayer that we're called to, like being tamed by the Lord. So
what do you see? Tell me a little bit more about that dating advice piece, because I was intrigued by when I was going through the flower part. Like I didn't yet know where it was like quite going, and hearing you guys talking about it, it seems like probably the flower makes a return later on.
The flower is the key.
Is the key there. And so I haven't gotten into the key. So I'm in the early parts, and as I'm reading about the flower, she's kind of just annoying, right? Like she just like, as he's talking about this flower, I don't know all the exact specific details, but like she's very kind of pretentious. She's very about herself, and he makes a couple like digs towards her, and that like she was very untrusting. And I couldn't tell if this was going to be like, I wonder if somebody could read this and be like, oh, this is the micro adventure about how this author doesn't like women. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it could have been like to kind of dig on the relationship between men and women, and that they're kind of self-entitled, that they kind of think about their appearances. But his language changes a little bit, and there was a little bit of softness and there's a little bit of sweetness, and the little prince was very like kind and gentle towards this flower. And I was like, dang, I'm being called out. And then I was the one thinking like this was going to go in one direction. And then like the little prince is turning into more of a gentleman than like I was turning into and like thinking where it was going to go. So I'm intrigued what you see as the dating advice, because I saw a little bit of that fluctuation trying to figure out where the flower thing is going.
Yeah, to maybe say a couple more things about like the relationship with the flower, just to give some like data points. So he's there, the flower appears on his world, and there is no other flower like it. And the flower says, I'm the only one like me. And the flower ends up lying about something, which is like, I have thorns so I can stop cats from attacking me or something like that. And it's like something kind of ridiculous. And he's like, but there are no cats in your world. And so like, or something like that. And so he figures out the flower is lying and he's really hurt. And even though he still loves the flower, eventually he decides to leave. And he like has this kind of like falling out with the flower. And he's like, and I decided to leave because, and I think there was even a line in there, because I didn't know how to love yet.
Oh wait, is that why he leaves? Is because he was hurt by the flower?
Yeah. Well,
yeah,
I think that very much is a microcosm of like what you were talking about, the male-female relationship, the struggle that every man and every woman in a relationship with one another is going to find, or at least the classical themes that are often found in those relationships, and oftentimes when there are this vanity and this like very attentiveness that like you have to give, and you have to be very careful about what you say so as not to offend, and all of those things. It leads us to be like, well, I just want to run away. Like I just want to like go be by myself. And I think that's very like men experience that.
Yeah, and it's similar to, and I'm not sure it explicitly says this is why and that is why I left, but it's definitely tied in to the story of the flower.
I think I missed that.
And so what he finds is he goes to Earth and he thinks about the flower all throughout, but he goes to Earth and he finds like it says something like 10,000 or 40,000 roses in a single field, and not one of them was like his flower, right? Like it was the one flower that had belonged to him.
Well, at first,
that was meaningful.
He was
sad. Right?
At first, he was traumatized, but he was like, "Oh my goodness, my flower lied to me. Like she said that she was the only one in the whole world." He's like, "All of these exist," and he was like dejected, and he starts crying because like he had started to regret leaving his flower, and then he comes to this moment where he's reminded of his flower, and he's like, I don't even know what to do anymore. And then that's precisely when the fox shows up.
Did he have a sadness?
Talks about taming. Yeah.
Did he have a sadness in that? I couldn't recall if when he saw that field of flowers, I thought he was saying something along the lines of like he noticed that his flower was not unique and that there was many other just like his flower. Is that part of
that's part of that
sadness there?
I thought I was rich because I had just one flower and all I owned was an ordinary rose. Yeah.
So what's his arc after that? Does he rediscover a uniqueness about?
So can I read this section? Yeah. I think that this is the key to unlocking the rest of the book, this story with the fox. So it's a little longer, but it's so good.
Yeah,
Who are you? The little prince asked. You're very pretty. I'm a fox, the fox said. Come play with me, the little prince proposed. I'm feeling so sad. I can't play with you, the fox said. I'm not tamed. Ah, excuse me, said the little prince. But upon reflection, he added, What does tamed mean? You're not from around here, said the fox. What are you looking for? I'm looking for people, said the little prince. What does tamed mean? People, said the fox, have guns and they hunt. It's quite troublesome. And they also raise chickens. That's the only interesting thing about them. Are you looking for chickens? No, said the little prince. I'm looking for friends. What does tamed mean? It's something that's been too often neglected. It means to create ties. To create ties? That's right, the fox said. For me, you're only a little boy, just like 100,000 other little boys. and I have no need of you. And you have no need of me either. For you, I'm only a fox, like 100,000 other foxes. But if you tame me, we'll need each other. You'll be the only boy in the world for me. I'll be the only fox in the world for you." I'm beginning to understand," the little prince said. "There's a flower. I think she's tamed me." "Possibly," the fox said. "On Earth, one sees all kinds of things." "Oh, this isn't on Earth," the little prince said. The fox seemed quite intrigued. "On another planet?" "Yes." "Are there hunters on that planet?" "No." "Now that's interesting. And chickens?" "No." "Nothing's perfect," sighed the fox. But he returned to his idea. "My life is monotonous. I hunt chickens, people hunt me. All chickens are just alike, and all men are just alike, so I'm rather bored. But if you tame me, my life will be filled with sunshine. I'll know the sound of footsteps that will be different from all the rest. Other footsteps send me back underground. Yours will call me out of my burrow like music. And then look, you see the wheat fields over there? I don't eat bread. For me, wheat is of no use whatever. Wheat fields say nothing to me, which is sad. But you have the hair the color of gold. So it will be wonderful once you've tamed me. Wheat, which is golden, will remind me of you, and I'll love the sound of the wind in the wheat." The fox fell silent and stared at the little prince for a long while. "Please, tame me," he said. "I'd like to," the little prince replied, "but I haven't much time. I have friends to find, and so many things to learn." "The only things you learn are the things you tame," said the fox. "People haven't time to learn anything. They're buying things ready-made in stores. But since there are no stores where you can buy friends, people no longer have friends. If you want a friend, tame me." "What do I have to do?" asked the little prince. "Well, you have to be very patient," the fox answered. "First, you'll sit down a little ways away from me over there in the grass. I'll watch you out of the corner of my eye, and you won't say anything. Language is the source of misunderstandings. But day by day, you'll be able to sit a little closer." The next day, the little prince returned. "It would have been better for you to have come at the same time," the fox said. "For instance, if you come at 4 in the afternoon, I'll begin to be happy by 3. The closer it gets to 4, the happier I'll feel. By 4, I'll be all excited and worried. I'll discover what it costs to be happy. But if you come at any old time, I'll never know when I should prepare my heart. There must be rites." R-I-T-E-S. "What's a rite?" asked the little prince. "That's another thing that's been too often neglected," said the little prince. "It's the fact that one day is different from all the other days, 1 hour from all the other hours. My hunters, for example, have a rite. They dance with the village girls on Thursdays. So Thursdays is a wonderful day, and I can take a stroll all the way to the vineyards. If the hunters danced on whatever day they chose, the days would all be just alike, and I'd have no holiday at all." That was how the little prince tamed the fox, and when the time to leave was near, "Ah," the fox said, "I shall weep." "It's your own fault," the little prince said. "I never wanted to do you any harm, but you insisted that I tame you." "Yes, of course," the fox said. "But you're going to weep," said the little prince. "Yes, of course," the fox said. "Then you get nothing out of it." "I got something," the fox said, "because of the color of the wheat." And then he tells him to go and see the roses again. And the little prince goes back and he looks at the roses and he says, "Well, you're nothing at all like my rose." And he goes into this long thing and he says to them, "You're empty. You're lovely, but you're empty. Because nobody could die for you." You've tamed no one. And in a sense, I guess that statement that he says to all the other roses is precisely the statement that every young man, when he falls in love and when he commits his life to somebody, that's the statement that he has to be able to say to every other woman that he's not committing his life to. And not in the sense that they're empty and unlovable, but in the
You
sense
have not
that
tamed me.
he has not been tamed.
You're
by
empty
them.
for me.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you will be. Yeah. It's beautiful.
I think.
Oh my gosh.
Wow.
Can we just take a second?
It's amazing. Like that part about the rites also I found beautiful in the atmosphere of religion and the atmosphere of dating, in that like there is a certain sense of like beauty to ritual. Like man likes habits. Man likes to wake up and have a routine and structure in some capacity that's like nice for us. Like, sure, is there some monotony that the Fox talks about that can be present? Yes, but like there's some aspect of like this rite of taming which is beautiful that exists in like dating, and like I'm going to move a little bit closer and a little bit closer as we get to know each other, and I'm going to like take you out on like dates, and there's a rhythm and there's a structure that has to continue into marriage, and like I find there's a beauty to that, just as there's the same kind of dating of the Lord in the church and these rites that I do because I want to continue to like know my beloved who is God. And I don't know, that language of rites and that setup of like moving towards each other in like a specific kind of dance like that, I find really beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's obviously very, very obviously connected to the Lord too. Is like the Lord, and I like, not everybody's like at this level in their faith life yet, but there's a way in which the Lord really does want to romance us and want to draw us in to who he is, and like let us see that everything else is empty besides him. And like that's so like, yeah.
It seems to be worth a read of Song of Songs. I mean, that's also like another short book to read. Like, go read Song of Songs if you haven't. It's in the Old Testament. And from my understanding, even in, like it's been traditionally interpreted as, I mean, it's about a man and a woman and their like romantic love for each other, but it's been seen analogously as like God's love for his people, for his bride, and like his chosen one, us. So there is a certain real like presence of God romancing his people in the Old Testament and in Scripture, and like tons of St. Paul says, Christ's bride is the church. So you're certainly saying nothing against Christian tradition there.
It's all well within the tradition, but it's definitely, I think, at the outset difficult for us to get to the point of like, whoa, God is in love with me and wants me to be in love with him, which is wild. Well, are we going to talk about the end of the book or not?
Go for it. I want to throw in
my heart breaks thinking about it.
While you're thinking of your finale conversation there on at least the end of the book. A thing that I liked in you were reading The Fox too is I feel like there's a freedom that a person could find in that I feel like there are some men that probably are being tamed by a woman or in a relationship with somebody that's like good. It's a good relationship. But maybe he notices some of her weaknesses, right? Like this flower was like a little bit pretentious in some ways, but there was a sweetness, there was a loveliness, but there's some thorns that she has. But then he sees like another flock, another field, and is maybe a little dismayed in that he sees comparison. And I feel like this book's answer to how does one go about like finding the loveliness of my rose is like, she's mine, and there's something to that, which is like, I have established relationship with this individual, and that is of value. Like the history that you experience together and the little threads of your life built up together, like is extremely valuable.
Yeah, and to be very clear, like the Little Prince, for him, the she's mine is not a possessiveness.
Yes, fair.
But
yes,
rather a she's mine, and therefore that demands something of me. Like I am responsible for this rose, and I he begins to like little by little throughout the book feel remorse for having left her, and he like now after realizing this is when he sets himself relentlessly on returning to his rose and fulfilling that responsibility of love.
Philosopher / sorry, go ahead.
Oh yeah, but that turns us towards like the end of the book and what happens.
I was just reminded of like philosopher / theologian Peter Kreeft. He tells a story that I can't remember where I found it from, but I'm pretty sure he tells a story of like he's talking to his son or his grandson. I think it's his son.
Okay.
And his son basically asks like, "Daddy, why do you love me?" And Peter Creef says, like, he gave all the typical answers that like one would give, like, well, maybe because you're funny and you're strong. And he saw that like his son was not satisfied in the answers that he was offering. And he's like, then I decided to be honest. And I said, I love you because you're mine. And then he kind of gave up, cheerfully gave him a hug and said like, thanks, Daddy. And then like ran off to play. But I think that there's a great spiritual theological point in the story of the Little Prince and what's echoed in Peter Creef's life there, which is like, we are not loved by God because of like my values and my traits and the things that I've merited and the things that I do, but like because I'm his child. And like that is, I think, where our identity has to rest.
Amen.
Otherwise we're going to be like the man counting and the vain man seeking admiration. Like I will always try to fill something if I don't know, like,
Yeah. All those other guys are trying to seek the thing that they think is going to bring them rest in one way and pleasure in one way, but those pleasures are not belonging, and belonging is just the central piece. Yeah.
All right, give me the summary and analysis of the end of this book.
Rip.
Yeah. So
Rest in Prince. All right,
Rest.
go ahead.
So the end of the book, the Little Prince realizing this, like, he meets the fox on the planet Earth before he meets the pilot, the author. And so after he meets the fox, that's when he journeys back to the desert. And it's actually the desert very close to where the pilot crash landed, where he first started his journey to Earth a year ago. And so early on, like when he first got here, he met a snake, and the snake, he was like, "You're a funny creature. Like, you don't have any legs. You can't go very far." And the snake said to him, "I can take you farther than like the furthest ship, like with one bite, or something along those lines." And with one bite, I send back to his home.
I can send you back to your home. Yeah.
Who I bite. And the Little Prince, hearing this, like he remembers that. And now he's like, I have to go home. And so he journeys back to.
Is this actually like this is actually like a fantasy aspect to the snake, in that if he bites somebody, it will actually send him back to his planet?
Well,
that's what
analogy
the Little
is
Prince
that
kind of believes.
That's what he believes. Okay.
I'll like when I bite someone, I send them back from where they came. Okay. And like
the adult readers of this are looking at this and being like,
poison
snake.
Yeah, I'm like,
you go back into the ground and you die.
Yeah, okay, that's what I was reading it as. I didn't know that.
But the Little Prince, hearing this, like sees, for him, he sees and it's not clear to the reader. Does he understand that he actually is going to die? Because it seems like he does understand that he's going to die, like in a couple other things that he says in the end of the book, but that he sees something beyond just what's visible into the invisible, which is kind of the lesson that he learned from the fox, that anything essential is invisible to the eye. So he's journeying back to the place where he started, because it's been a year, and his planet will be directly above, and it'll be the closest that his planet is to like this point on the Earth. And so, and it's here that he's talking to the snake. He's like, and your poison is good. Like, I won't suffer for very long. And there's this interplay between the pilot and the Little Prince, like the pilot seeing the snake and trying to stop this, and like pulls out a revolver and tries to shoot the snake, but it scurries away. And eventually, like the Little Prince goes back at night, and the snake bites him, and the Little Prince dies, and he falls to the ground, and the pilot is there, and
the pilot had walked with him to his death, which was really a beautiful scene. And he was kind of like, please don't do this, please don't do this. And the Little Prince is just giving him all these truths about like why he's going back, and like what he can still mean to the pilot, and the pilot to him.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and when I'm away, like you who love my little laugh, when I'm away, when you look up at the stars and know that I'm up there somewhere on my own planet, it will be as if all of the stars are laughing. And it'll be my little joke on you, because you will look up at the sky and laugh too, and all of your friends will think you're nuts. But you will have a secret, and you will have an intimacy there in that moment, looking up at the stars. And so the little prince dies. His body's nowhere to be found the next day. And so the pilot is led to believe that he did make it back to his planet. Even like the last page, it's like, this is the land. I've drawn the landscape where the little prince left so that you can look and be very certain to recognize it and it's just like this little sketch. So there's no way that you would recognize it in the actual desert, but so that you can be certain that you'd recognize it, so that if you were there and you see him come back, that you can come and tell me. And it's a beautiful way to end the book. It's very whimsical. But it speaks directly to that idea that love begets responsibility, and responsibility begets sacrifice.
So does he get back to the flower?
We don't know. Like that, it's just totally left.
But
up in the air.
he was willing to risk death to do it, even if whether he got back or not.
Because presuming in the workings of the story, there's no other way for him to get back to his planet.
He doesn't seem to entertain any other kind of idea. Yeah.
Yeah, and so like, while it, again, like, it's an analogy for the sacrifice in human love, a man for a woman laying down his life for his bride, but it's also this analogy for the spiritual life. When we actually fall in love with God and experience Him in deep prayer, we relentlessly set our hearts on the kingdom of heaven. Like, things of this life no longer matter, and we long for heaven, and we're willing to lay everything else in this life down for the sake of that union with God.
Yeah, and very appropriate too that you brought that up while you were talking about Exodus 90 today too, because we lay aside everything else that's not Him, and that's the heart of Christianity. The heart of Christianity is being loved, and so loving in return. I was talking to my students earlier maybe last week. I'm not sure. I talked to them a lot, but one of the things I was trying to teach them is that my entire life is like a daily proposal. God proposes to me daily, like, will you let me be the center? Will you let me be the gravity of your life? And like, we get to make that choice every day. And like, eternal life is us making that choice with permanence. And we live that out by the choice we make every day. So yeah, The Little Prince, Le Petit Prince, La Grande Idée, big ideas, from The Little Prince. It's like, it's awesome.
I'm going to have to see what I think of that conclusion when I get there. I'll be very intrigued to read over that, because I'm disheartened that he doesn't return to the flower.
Well,
or does he?
Maybe he did.
He does, man. But it's just not written.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
If I were to write down all of the things the Little Prince said, I suppose the books in the whole world.
Oh, get out of here.
I actually was thinking about that, and then I was like, no, that's not true. So I'd like to fact check Billy and say that's not true. Thank you.
Well, I had promised earlier some of those things that I was reading that I felt like were almost digs towards Christianity.
Yeah. What you got?
I was reading, let me at least take a look at one.
Oh, he's pulling up articles. That means he's convinced.
Oh, I'm totally
no. Oh, no.
So there was, so like, here's like the king on the planet, the first planet I think he goes to, where he's talking to the king. And he's talking about, like, you're going to be my whatever guy who can judge himself. And he says, but I can judge myself anywhere, said the little prince. I don't need to live here. Well, the king said, I have good reason to believe that there's an old rat living somewhere on my planet. I hear him at night. You could judge that old rat. From time to time, you will condemn him to death. That way his life will depend on your justice. But you'll pardon him each time for economy's sake. There's only one rat. And so there's that piece. And then at the beginning, when they're talking about introducing this king, like, it's just the notion of, like, he just reigns over stuff. What, because he was, like, the first one there? Or
because he's the only one on the planet.
He's the only one on the planet. And so there's just this notion of, like, he's a bad king, right? I mean, like, and he just, like, wants
He doesn't
this.
have real authority. Yeah.
Yeah, and he just like he changes his demands and his requests just so that he can like ensure that people are obeying him appropriately.
Yeah, to appear that things are actually obeying him.
Yeah, and like the prince asks for a sunset, and he's like, well, when things are in proper order, and it seems the right time, I will grant that request, and that request will be at the time of sunset. And so as I'm reading that, maybe it's just because I'm always reading things in the lens of like, how is somebody going to attack Christianity or like look at it from a different perspective? Maybe I was looking for it. I don't know. But I saw it as like, okay, God is the tyrant who just keeps telling you like, without me, you're going to die. But like, I'm going to be merciful to you. And so like, I'm indebted to his justice and mercy in a way, or like he's king, but in a like tyrannical, I just want to be obeyed kind of way. Like,
yeah,
I was just seeing it as like it could be little digs towards like God the King or Christ the King.
Well,
so I just thought that was,
and I mean,
possible interpretation.
Possible.
I suppose.
I think that part of the problem, and whenever we try to understand God, like we only can understand him from what we've experienced, and so we superimpose upon him like human characteristics so that we can try to understand him. And when we do that, like we fall short in that kind of way. But I think that, so like, I guess you can look at it and see that, well, somebody like this is the image for God, but I think it's rather the image for the human being who has put themselves in the seat of God, that they have been so consumed with a need for control of their own life and being the one who is obeyed that they know not how to obey. And that like, I think that like, maybe that's the reason why this is the first planet that the little prince comes to, that is the image of the grown-ups, because I think that by and large, like that is what we are trying to do. We are trying to have mastery and control of our own lives and not need God.
Not need God and not need to sacrifice, which are, two of the great things that have plagued us forever, but also plague us particularly in our age with the amount of choices that are always put before us, and the amount of, we even have people called influencers, right? Technically, I'm an influencer, I suppose, on this podcast, but nobody's paying me to sell you anything except the Lord, eternal riches. I'm hoping. Sorry, Lord.
Subscriber 47 on the channel is like, yeah, they're influencers.
Yeah. So, but I definitely hear what you're saying and would agree with Billy. It's like, we can only call God a despot ruler from our weak interpretation of like, what does rule look like? And we've actually, the only fully just ruler we've ever seen is God. And like, because it's out of our experience, we can't fully like give that its due. But we do know that we have a God who also died for us. And so that seems like different than the king.
The king is depicted there who has no interest in, and certainly there's some huge differences there of like self-sacrifice versus be my subject. Yeah. Like the cross is the feature of Christianity, and that's a pretty big, I lay myself down and take this bullet for you because I so deeply love you. And like, it's certainly a different presentation. And there's probably something of, as Christians, we uphold the Trinity, and like God is not lonely. This king is very much like alone on his planet. Yeah, for sure. God being three persons in one nature, like he is.
God would have a bigger planet with more abundance.
And if it's like, okay, king on this planet like didn't actually make the universe and is not actually apparently king of things, the story seems to indicate that he's like lying or is like deceived, but like, okay, if somebody actually does have the power that like made everything, like, okay, well, I'd worship that guy.
Yeah.
Like,
maybe
that's a whole different thing than what I am.
Yeah, and God's justice isn't flippant. It's
sure.
Judge him from time to time, condemn him to death,
to keep
but
him
also
in line.
Keep him alive, pardon him.
Yeah.
For the economy of the one rat.
God's justice always, like every time, like if we look at punishments, like as if God's justice is about punishment, which in some ways it is, but it's not arbitrary punishment. It's always for the sake of healing. Like God punishes so as to heal our souls of the damage that our sin has done to it. So
that's a good point.
The real issue I think that I have with the book, like the theme that is contrary to Christianity.
Yeah, we enter the not so good section of the podcast, or what are the things we could critique or see.
And this is like the only one that I have about this book. It lends itself to Gnosticism.
Gasp.
Which is this early church heresy that says the physical world is bad.
And heresy being just a false teaching.
Thank you, yes. Or something that goes against what God has revealed to us, or contrary to the truth of what God has revealed to us. In the book, it kind of downplays the significance of the body, downplays the significance of the visible. Like in the quote that that the fox says, he says to him, anything essential is invisible to the eyes. One sees clearly only with the heart.
Yeah.
And I think that part is true. Ultimately, anything essential, if you get into the philosophy of it, that's quite literally true. Anything essential is invisible to the eyes. But that doesn't make the physical aspect of the thing not real.
Yeah.
And later on, there's a part where the little prince is like, you mustn't come, you mustn't watch. It'll be as if I'm dead, but that won't be true. Because you understand it's too far, like the journey to his home planet. It's too far. I can't take this body with me. It's too heavy. It'll be like an old abandoned shell. There's nothing sad about an old shell. And it's alluding to this idea that the body is not me. What I really am is this invisible part of me, the soul. And listen, like in a world that has totally forgotten the invisible and is like consumed with a materialism,
that's really important to acknowledge the importance of the soul.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But to do away the significance of the body does away the significance of the incarnation, does away the significance of the resurrection. Christianity, like the actual gospel Christ reveals, does not make sense if the body is bad.
Yeah, like what we just are filming this right after the Christmas season ended, and like Christmas celebrates, hey, guess what? God became a person with a body and flesh. He became flesh.
Yeah, and when I say that God loves me, like he's not looking at like, oh, I love Thomas's soul. Like he loves me, body and soul. And that's like a kind of wild claim. Like he loves me as like the first time that God started loving me was when I was a body. And that's wild, when I was a body and a soul in my mother's womb, right? And like, even though he prepared for it, like that's the one that he loves, the whole me. And we also teach like, as Christians, like, even though we die, like our bodies come back, which is wild. We're getting our bodies back at the second coming, or we will have glorified bodies, which is pretty wild too.
Yeah, the ancient Apostles' Creed from the early church says, I believe in the resurrection of the body. Like, it's interesting, even in our catechism, it says, like, I don't know exactly what paragraph number it is, but it says something to the effect of this teaching that the body will rise again, and that like we are not just soul, but like our body is like a thing which has been challenged like throughout. Like it is a difficult concept for people to grasp, which is so fascinating to me. That like the catechism says this apparently is tough for people to grasp, but yeah, that's part of our faith. And like Jesus returned with a body, and it was his body. Like his wounds were present. Like I think that's part of what they like. And his body's different; it's glorified, so they don't recognize him, they don't notice him, and like they're walking with him for miles, and they don't know who this guy is. And then he breaks the bread, or as Catholics would say, like he celebrates the mass with them, and then their eyes are opened to him in like a new way. Like he sees their presence, and so there's something about his body which is the same. He has his wounds. It's his body, but it's also like very different. So whatever's going on there, I guess I look forward to seeing the glorified body that we will all receive.
We'll all have 8-packs.
Mine will be.
I was just
gonna make
thinking
some
about
joke,
beer.
I'm not
Sorry.
funny.
Yeah.
Like,
well, if they sold 8-packs, that would be great.
I am here to ruin also your latest Christmas present or addition to your Etsy shopping cart. This conversation reminds me, I'm showing the gentleman on my phone. This is a purchase you can make on Etsy of a C.S. Lewis quote, and I will read. It's a little nice, embroidered or like image print with some birds on it, and it says, from C.S. Lewis, "You don't have a soul, you are a soul. You have a body." Oof. And spoiler alert, that's not a C.S. Lewis quote. So if that's currently in a frame at your house.
Oh my gosh, thank goodness.
You can properly remove that.
Wow, I didn't know C.S. Lewis was in it.
Yeah, I know. I'm like showing this to these two gentlemen. They're like, "You're ruining my favorite theologian." I just saw, there was a Catholic Answers article that was like, "It's not a quote by C.S. Lewis. Like, it's not real." And I don't know what the origins of it popping out is, like where it comes from, but they were like, "Yeah, this is not a real quote from C.S. Lewis." I don't know who's attributing it to him, but funny that's like, that's a current popular trend that people are sharing on social media this time, is that you are your soul and you have a body, but that's not at least what Christianity would propose, and that like my body actually matters. It's not just like a thing that I possess.
Yeah.
It's like the early Gnostics who wrote a gospel about the life of Jesus and attributed it to Thomas so that they could get their ideas more well spread. It's what they're doing.
The 20th century gospel, according to C.S. Lewis.
Gnosticism seems to be... Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just...
Yeah. Gnosticism to me also seemed a big piece of why it seemed rejected was it's also this idea that like the truth is like hidden. It's like, it's the Da Vinci Code. It's national treasure. It's that like the real hidden salvation is out there, and you got to like go search through the mysterious things and Illuminati things of the universe and like find it. It's not like... publicly revealed, which is certainly against like that Christ has come to save all, and it is publicly revealed and is not hidden in shadow for us to like. That seems like a big part of. I think the word Gnostic comes from like something like hidden.
Gnosis. Gnosis means to know.
Yeah.
So if you learn the secret knowledge, then you will be enlightened and will be able to free yourself from this physical realm of existing into higher, like more and more solely spiritual realms of existing and planes of existing. But I think that's what
you see a little bit of that.
That's what people do nowadays. Like they're convinced that once I find the secret knowledge, like this ideological structure that solves everything, this way of defining the human person, or this way of defining sexuality, or this way of defining success and power in the world, then everything falls into place, and your life will be complete. Your life will be solved, and I will save you, or like I will find salvation by that.
Yeah.
Like if only I understood everything perfectly. I think people, there's something about that. People live that way nowadays.
It reminds me too of, I don't know, the hiddenness of like, sometimes like the demonic and the way that it operates. And I just remember an exorcist commenting on like, if, let's just say someone's like possessed by a demon and like they've got some kind of like, evil activity in their life, which is, not a regular common occurrence in the Christian life for people to be possessed, but like it's a thing that still happens in the world and happened in the time of Christ. And he's like, people are all mystified by if I tell them to like go outside, grab a black cat on midnight during Halloween, like swing it over your head and like paint a fence like a specific color with this brush stroke. They're like, yeah, I'm going to do that. But if you tell them you got to go to confession and go to mass every Sunday, they're like, that's not enough. I got to find the hidden magical mystery.
So true.
It's
that's a great point.
It's actually God operates in the things he's revealed, and like in the simple and in like the basic, which is very Little Princey. It's not this grandiose thing that feels hidden from the universe that needs discovered by.
You mean I only have to dip in the water of this dirty Jordan River 7 times? That's not real.
Hilarious. Yeah, there you have it.
As far as like other, I don't know, do you have other negative things or like
No,
things you see
I'm an
that
immensely
concern?
positive person. So. Sorry, I just didn't have any negative thing. I was like, I love the story.
I haven't read the, I'm glad you shared that one. I think that's a good point. I think that I'll be intrigued to see what I think about it as I read the conclusion. But as you're talking about the like death thing, I'm like, I got to figure out how this is written. Because it seems like, I don't know, Snake is offering the path back to like salvation, which is like an odd choice of character, which is sort of interesting to me. Like if he's actually trying to make a dig on Christianity, it seems odd that like the Snake, which is, at least in Christianity, like a very evil character. If there's anything there, I don't know,
Well, I mean, even Christ's cross, like many mystics in the history of the church have said stuff along these lines of like the cross being Christ wrestling with Satan, or like the cross being Satan's plan of thinking that he won.
Yeah.
And then in the end, like it being the very thing that backfires on him that gives the victory to Christ. So that would be where I would go.
Yeah, but certainly we can never find salvation by going to Satan to allow him to do something with us or to us that would like bring us healing.
Yeah, very true. The image that we ought to be focusing on in there is like the image of willingness to die, not seeking out evil in any way, as like the kind of way to ensure that our purposes are being met. It is willingness to die, but it of course the little deaths, like the little deaths to our pleasure.
It's like a willingness to sacrifice.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Christ set his face resolutely on Jerusalem,
Yeah.
Like he knew he was dying and he sought it out.
And there's something interesting about, so certainly there's like, I think if we understand the poetic mystery of how you guys have interpreted it and explained the conclusion of like what his death is happening there as like a sort of crucifixion, resurrection motif, Paschal mystery thing.
Sure.
I think there's some beauty there. As you're explaining it, I was like, but why can't he just fly back home? Like there's an alternative route here, buddy. Like you don't have to choose this one. And I think to suspend it's not apparently a mechanism of which it's just assuming this is the way back.
Yeah.
I think as you were explaining it, I was just thinking of like, well, there probably are times in our life where we actually could achieve a good end by like removing certain sufferings, and like that is also acceptable. Like I don't have to choose the hardest, most deadly route to get something done. Like people that kind of like have crosses that like need not to be borne. That's kind of like a result of their own choices.
Mm-hmm.
Like, somebody who's just like suffering physically because they're not eating well, they're not exercising, they're not brushing their teeth or showering. Like that is not a cross you're bid to carry. Like there are steps we can take to alleviate physical suffering. I'm painting that in a very clear example. I know that people have like physical ailments and like things that are not totally in their control, but like for the person that it is.
I think that what you're saying is generally right. I think that what I hear you saying is like there really are ways in which we make life difficult for ourselves in a way which doesn't actually lead to greater love.
Yes.
And we also demand things of ourselves sometimes that like God doesn't actually want to demand of us. And so we need to discern what God demands of us or what our relationships demand of us. And that discernment is a good.
Virtue of prudence.
And also another reason why it's so good to do that in community with other people who can give you feedback, like for Exodus 90, or like my pastor, or like my best friends who also share the Christian life with me. So
yeah.
So yeah.
So is there a negativity in that he doesn't listen to the pilot? He sets himself on his own path, but contrary to the advice of the pilot.
I think he's teaching the pilot something in the midst of that whole dynamic. I'll let you decide when you get.
Yeah, I haven't read it. I'm speaking of the guy that hasn't read the conclusion. So.
Yeah, Charlie's trying to poke holes in a conclusion he hasn't read. So no offense, Charlie.
I'm the kid that read Spark Notes and then dominates the discussion. Who didn't read the material?
Interestingly, Charlie and I. This is a kind of fun aside. Charlie and I were in an ethics class in college together, and we would always be like sparring in college, and in that ethics we had one class together, and I just like
I'm intrigued to
every time that we were in there I was like, I feel like my real intellectual foil was Charlie, and
see, I'm excited to sit down with you after this conversation and rehash your memory of how that goes by, because there's so many like bits and pieces I've forgotten that I'm intrigued to rehash what happened.
Score.
In any case, I forgave him.
Thank you so much.
But yeah, it's probably about time to close up the podcast. So, Billy, thank you so much for coming.
It's my pleasure.
This was a joy to have you.
I would do a 28 podcast series about the Little Prince. So are there any
residual like final thoughts that you're like, man, I wanted to come into this saying this, but I haven't had the chance to talk about XYZ? Is there anything else like?
I think that everything that's necessary, again, this is the whole thing of The Little Prince. Like, it's like the gospel. You can read it again and find something new. So I guess, like, I'm not trying to exhaust The Little Prince. Like, I'm not trying to exhaust the gospel, because if I exhaust it, then I can't go back to drink from it again. So I'm very happy with what we've said.
Yeah. Excellent.
And certainly, none of the art we present here is the gospel, but it certainly is an additional inspiration of man that helps benefit our encounter with the gospel.
Amen.
Which is divine.
Yeah. So with that, we'll conclude in prayer. Let's begin. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Let's take a moment to remember that God loves us. Let us remember that Jesus came and died so that we might have life with him. Mighty God, you are Lord of Lords and King of Kings. You came that we might have life and have it abundantly. When you came, you taught us to follow you in everything, including taking up our cross daily. But you also taught us to become like little children. You taught us to love. You taught us to be in communion. And we just ask that we might be like little children. We might follow you like little children. Not to take away anything of the full stature of our manhood or our humanity, but to remind ourselves that we are led by a good God who chooses us to follow him, who we belong to. And so make us more deeply aware of this belonging. Make us all deeply aware of how much you love us and how much you choose us just because we're yours. Lord, as we conclude our podcast today, we ask you to bless Billy and his family, and to bless our families and our loved ones, and bless all of our listeners with your blessings that can only lead us closer to you, and give us everything that is necessary to be saved. Save us, Lord, today and always. Give us life, love, and hope, beauty, truth, and goodness, and abundance. We love you. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Amen.
Yeehaw.
Yeehaw. Give us a like and a subscribe if you haven't yet, or contribute to our channel. We look forward to seeing you again soon on the Media Mystics podcast.
Peace.
Bye. Toodles.
For every work of art we talk about in this podcast, we also have prayerful guided meditations available based on that work of art in the Mystic Moments playlist. We invite you to join us for prayer. Also, a like, subscribe, a positive review, and especially supporting us on Patreon helps us dedicate more time to this ministry. Please send this episode to anyone you think might appreciate it. God bless.